My name's Dan Kovalic, and I'm an author as well. I was a labor lawyer, actually, for the steelworkers for 26 years. And I taught international human rights at the University of Pittsburgh School of Law for 12 years. So it's a little bit about me. So yeah, as Jeremy said, I do want to talk about what happened in Rwanda, Congo, and it's ongoing, by the way. It's very important. All eyes are on Gaza, and they should be, but should be some eyes on Congo, because the atrocities are continuing there. And what Clinton did in the Congo, to me, makes him, bar none, the greatest monster of the second half of the 20th century, without question. And you're going to say, what? And I'll just give you the figure: 6 million. 6 million Congolese died because of what Bill Clinton did. So let me talk a little bit about that. And some of the players who helped him in all that are still playing. Susan Rice, who's in the Biden administration. Samantha Power, who was not in his government, but she became an intellectual author of humanitarian intervention. And of course, good old Hillary, who we saw again as Secretary of State under Obama and led us into other wars like the one in Libya. But again, let me focus on poor Congo. First of all, Congo, now the Democratic Republic of Congo, again, is one of the most brutalized countries ever in all of history. I urge people to read King Leopold's Ghost, about what King Leopold of Belgium did in Congo in the late 19th and early 20th century. It's estimated he killed 10 million Congolese to harvest rubber there, to harvest ivory. And then finally, thanks to the Anti-Imperialist League, which was founded by some great people like Mark Twain, who again, most people don't know, was a great anti-imperialist, beautiful man. The Congo was taken away from King Leopold and given directly to Belgium itself. Things didn't improve too much under Belgium. And for one moment, Congo looked like it was going to become an independent state with some hope under the Prime Minister, Patrice Lumumba. And Belgium and the US would conspire to murder him. And they put in power Mobutu Sese Seko, who would loot and brutalize Congo for the next decades as a major ally of the United States, and got a lot of support from the United States. That brings us to the early and mid-1990s, where the next great atrocities in Congo would happen. Now, in addition to Jeremy, I would also urge people to read Edward S. Herman, the great late Edward S. Herman, on Rwanda and Congo. He's one of the great revisionist historians on those countries. By the way, he was the brains of the operation, I believe, of the Chomsky Herman team. Their great book was Manufacturing Consent, and even Chomsky insisted Herman's name appear first on the book, even though it was out of alphabetical order. And Herman wrote, near the end of his life, wrote furiously about Rwanda. Because what do we think about Rwanda? We are told, and Samantha Power told us, amongst others, and Hollywood told us, amongst others, in the case Hotel Rwanda, that it was a very simple morality tale, where the minority Tutsis, who, by the way, the West had favored for years and years and years, were genocided by the bad Hutus, who were the vast majority of the population. And that Paul Kagame, leading the Rwandan Patriotic Forces, a Tutsi group, were the heroes who came in, ended the genocide, and all lived happily ever after. And of course, Paul Kagame is still president. And, by the way, the hero of Hotel Rwanda, who himself doesn't buy that story, is in jail in Rwanda. And no one cares. Don Cheadle doesn't care, who almost got an Oscar for playing him. It's pretty incredible. But so that isn't the real story. The real story is that, as you mentioned, Paul Kagame was an agent of the United States. He was trained at Fort Leavenworth, I believe in 1990. He was then brought to Uganda, where he did organize, with the help of the United States, the Rwandan Patriotic Forces. And, he was trained there before 1990.
In Georgia.
What's that?
In Georgia.
No, it was definitely Fort Leavenworth. Fort Leavenworth, Kansas.
And he was trained in psychological warfare.
Yeah. And so he invades. Everyone thinks that the genocide is beginning in 1994. But Paul Kagame and the Rwandan Patriotic Forces invade Rwanda in 1990. And they displaced about 1 million Mossi Hutus in the capital there. And this is what leads to the crisis that does play out in a genocide, but the genocide isn't what people say it is. Eventually, there was a leader, a Hutu leader, who was elected. I'm forgetting his name at the moment. Who wanted peace there, including between the Tutsis and Hutus.
He had been the long-standing leader. Kagame invaded. They killed. The RPF would slaughter Hutu like flies whenever they entered an area. Right. And then he shot down Habermas's plane.
It's believed that he shot down that president's plane. Yeah. And that's an important fact, because this is what begins the genocide, is the murder of that president. Now, it's very interesting, if you watch Hotel Rwanda, Paul Rusesabagina, played by Don Cheadle, he's told of the death of the president, and he's told that, it looks like it was the Rwandan Patriotic Forces that did it. And he said, well, that doesn't make sense. That's what Don Cheadle says. I interviewed Paul Rusesabagina. He thinks it makes a lot of sense. He does believe it. Okay, so that's one lie up in Hotel Rwanda. Another big lie, again, in Hotel Rwanda, is that Paul Kagame's forces at the end are shown in the red berets entering Rwanda and entering where Hotel Rwanda is and saving everyone, and roll tape, and they even show the real photo of Paul Kagame, head of the Russian Patriotic Forces, is the hero of the story. The end. Again, Paul Rusesabagina says, no, it's not that way. He says, I saw Rwandan Patriotic Forces murdering Hutus and Tutsis, and actually somehow converting them into the bodies into ashes and spraying them around to get rid of the evidence. So the truth is that the U.S. supports Kagame in marching all the way to Rwanda and taking over. Okay, and they murder, according to the State Department itself, about 10,000 people, I think, a month. To do this. So yes, there's no question Hutus were murdering Tutsis, but there's no question that his forces were murdering both Tutsis and Hutus. And in fact, the only very good evidence on the story shows more Hutus were killed than Tutsis. So this, and again, Edward S. Herman was the person who exposed a lot of this. Now, why is all this important? So first of all, Samantha Power, who's now head of USAID and who's continuing to run interference for the genocide in Gaza, she got her start by writing a book against genocide called A Problem from Hell. And her story is that there's genocide in the world because people, brown people commit genocides in the West, doesn't do anything about it. That's her story. She never talks about when the West commits the genocide. She doesn't mention Vietnam. She doesn't mention even the genocide in Guatemala in the 80s, which everyone, even Clinton, admitted was a genocide.
She doesn't mention Angola.
Right. So her story, which again is the story of Hotel Rwanda, it's the mainstream story, is that the West looked away when the genocide was happening. No, the West helped. The U.S. made it happen. There were, the true part of the story is there were UN peacekeepers there. And it is true that the head of the UN peacekeepers, the Canadian general, said he could have prevented the genocide. Who pulls them out? The Security Council decides to pull them out because Clinton put in the resolution to pull those people out. And who did it? Who did it at the UN? Who was in charge of doing that? Susan Rice, who still works for Joe Biden. And they were pulled out so Kagame's forces could go murder a lot of people and take over, which he did. And why? Rwanda has no natural resources. Rwanda is not important for the West in terms of resources. But the next door neighbor was, and that's the Democratic Republic of Congo. At that point, that it was still Zaire, I believe, still under our good friend Mobutu. But Mobutu, the problem was, he wasn't as good of a friend as he used to be. He started to do insane things because he thought maybe, even though I'm a dictator, I need to do something for the people so I can stay in power. So he started taxing businesses and, creating a few social programs. Well, that was unacceptable. So the goal was not to take over Rwanda per se, but to take over Rwanda so that they could then take over Congo. And that's what happens. In 1996, Bill Clinton supports Paul Kagame and Uganda and I think 15 other countries. This becomes the World War of Africa, which no one's ever heard of, to invade Congo, overthrow our good buddy Mobutu, put in Laurent Kabila, and in the process, they murdered 6 million Congolese, mostly women and children. Many women were raped. In the process, women continue to be raped by the forces we support in Rwanda and Uganda to this day, and people are killed. In fact, even as Gaza's been happening, the violence in Congo has increased, and no one ever hears about it. And the reason we wanted to code Congo is because it is the most mineral-rich country in the world. All these little cell phones we got in our pockets, not possible without Congo. All your lithium batteries, tungsten, cobalt, none of these things will we have. And they're mined by people who are virtual slaves, including children. And it is happening because the U.S., through Paul Kagame, was able to invade Congo and make it this vassal state. And actually, and I'll end it because I don't want to take too much time, but again, Congo is something people need to know about. And I believe this changes the nature of U.S. foreign policy in Congo in a way that people don't realize. It used to be that the U.S. would want to set up a strongman like Mobutu in a country so they could help plunder all the resources for the U.S. But then in Congo, they start a new policy. How about no leader at all? How about we just wreck the place, create sheer anarchy? Then there's no one there to tax us, no one there to set up tariffs, and we just loot the place. And we went on to do that in places like Libya, for example. Again, with Hillary Clinton, Samantha Power, and Susan Rice being the 3 main intellectual authors of that. And so now we don't want strongmen. We want complete chaos and anarchy, which is even worse. So those are my remarks. Thank you.
Well, if I could add one point, they invaded twice. They installed Laurent Kabila, but then when he was trying to be he was actually trying to tax foreign companies and reassert some Congolese control, because Laurent Kabila had fought with Che Guevara in the 1960s.
Correct.
After the murder of the mob. Then they took out Laurent Kabila. Kagame had invaded Congo numerous times, and he's behind the murder of numerous heads of state. He's one of the most murderous leaders of all time. They call him the African Hitler in Africa. So they installed Laurent Kabila, but he wasn't a pliable enough puppet. So they then had him murdered, and they imposed Joseph Kabila, whose real name was Hippolyte Kanambe, and was a Rwandan quisling, basically an agent of the Rwandese, running the Congo for like 15 years, and he gave everything the West wanted. And he also murdered, I have a book, it was written by a Congolese dissident named Yao Lengi, and it's actually, the subtitle is Kagame, African Hitler, but it also has stuff on this Hippolyte Kanambe. He murdered hundreds, if not thousands of people, including members of his own family and sister, in part to cover up the lie of his back. He lied about who he was and how he was an agent of Rwanda. And he was adopted. He took the name Kabila because he had been adopted, but actually his real father was Rwandan, and he had to cover up his own background, and people got killed because of that, and then he just went on a killing spree, and the U.S. government was supporting him because he was doing their bidding in Congo. So.
Yeah, and again, just to reiterate, Paul Rusesabagina is in jail in Rwanda for the same reason, because he started telling the truth.
Yeah, and the Kagame regime, that is a totalitarian regime. He has people spy on everybody. He murdered Kizio Mihigo, the leading gospel singer in Rwanda. Kagame had him murdered because he had some lyrics that were even just mildly critical. And he's hunted people of his former RPF people have been hunted down and murdered in South Africa, all around the world. And they have agents everywhere. They have agents.
Including in the U.S.?
Yeah, and I used to have roommates from Rwanda, and they were part of the RPF, and they were agents of the RPF. They're nice guys, but they were studying at Harvard, but they were agents. They have agents everywhere. It's a pure totalitarian government, and it's murdered who knows how many. They had to set up open-air crematorium to dispose of the bodies during the Civil War and after. That's how sick it was. And this is Bill Clinton said he's the greatest leader of our time.
Yeah, and then Samantha Power says it, and you can find photos.
And they have open air
yeah.
crematorium. I mean, this is beyond sick.
Beyond the beyond.
Also to cover themselves, Rwanda became the first country on the planet to have a majority or a complete majority female parliament as a cover.